Africa has been in the church's news this week for two important reasons. Firstly, a protocol for the exchange of priests has been signed between the organization that groups all the European Episcopal Conferences and its counterpart that groups the African Episcopal Conferences. Through this protocol, African priests will be able to come officially to work in Europe and to occupy so many positions in parishes that are abandoned due to a lack of clergy. At the same time, the Europeans commit themselves to help the African seminaries, especially with money. There is a possibility that some European priests will go to work in Africa. This is indeed possible, but at the moment I think it is unlikely. This is the opposite of what happened in the 19th century. At that time, there were many European priests, especially from the religious foundations, the White Combini Fathers, and many others, who went to evangelize sub-Saharan Africa. Christianity was just beginning to develop there, and there were very few native clergy. It was a church that was being born. It was a church that was beginning. Now Africa, it is Africa that is coming to evangelize the old Europe. But the reason is just the contrary. In Europe, the church is a church that at this moment is dying. Let us hope that the African priests who come to Europe do not allow themselves to be infected by the libertarian virus, which is that of accommodation to the world and what is killing the church in the old continent. The other news of the week related to Africa has been led by a cardinal, the Congolese Cardinal Ambogo, who is the president of this organism of the African Episcopal Conferences. Ambogo was already in the news a few weeks ago when, on behalf of the African Episcopate, he rejected the Fiducia Supplicans Declaration, which allows blessings to couples in an irregular situation, heterosexual or homosexual. Although this rejection was later agreed, and therefore some of the things that has been said by the African episcopates were suppressed in order not to stir up some blood. And the fundamental reason for this rejection was accepted as being the African culture. It is true that this gesture of the Africans with Ambogo and its head was decisive when it became clear that Fiducia Supplicans did not have the support, I would even say, of the majority of the church. Well, Ambogo has now made some new statements and has put his finger on a problem that was latent there and that many were talking about without daring to say so. In some statements, he has said that the publication of Fiducia Supplicans in the middle of the two synods on synodality has been a publication harmful to synodality and harmful to the synodal process, and that it has discredited, in his words, it has discredited both of the synod of synodality and synodality itself. He has done nothing more than say what many think. If you gather people together, if you summon them supposedly to be listened to, if the team is precisely listening, and if after, not long after, that first synod has taken place, such an important document is published, which was already written before, and which is not discussed in the synod, what is there to think about? Because in the synod, in the first place, the first part of the synod on the synodality of the 28 working groups, the 26 of them, the possibility of the blessing of homosexual couples was not even raised. It was only raised in the 2 of the 28, and then not even with a majority. And yet, there was a considerable number of lay and religious men and women with the right to vote. And without that number of guests with the right to vote possibly, the conclusions of the synod would have been more even consistent with the doctrine of the church. Well, the questions are obvious, as some people think. Was the Synod of Synodality nothing more than an excuse, an alibi that was sought so that later it could be said that things like the judicial supplicants were published because they had the support of the Synod? Is it that, I repeat, as many think as the Cardinal Ambogo has put on the table, that in reality it is not a matter of listening, but of doing what is planned to be done? And if the result does not come out in a listening, the result that is wanted, it does not matter because it is going to be done anyway. It is that African cardinal who has said what many think fiducial supplicants has not only caused a problem of rejection in the many people in the church, not only in the African continent, but has discredited the Synod of Synodality and Synodality itself. What kind of listening is there when those who have been called to the herd are not taken into account? What kind of synod is it that has been created? Is it a synod dedicated to listening to the voice of the people of God, including their pastors? Or is it an ambile that has not turned out well and that was aimed at the publication of that kind of document and ultimately the modification of the sexuality, morality of the church? I insist, these are questions that many have been asking themselves, and Cardinal Ambongo has not put on the table. And this brings us to a question that is perhaps not opportune at this moment, but which is also appearing in many media. Who will be the next pope? Pope Francis is 87 years old, and for his age, he is in good health. Therefore, from that point of view, it is useless to make pools of papables. But the situation of the church leads to these pools being made, although my opinion is that generally they do not serve for much. But here they are. And within these pools at this moment, the role of Cardinal Abongo takes on a great protagonism, precisely because he is presiding over this organism of Episcopal Conferences of Africa, which is proven to be the place in the Catholic Church where there is more vitality, more strength to evangelize, and also more vocations. Africa is occupying at this moment the place once occupied by the European countries with its vitality and missionary capacity. The fact that it is African missionaries who are now coming to evangelize in Europe is very significant. And the fact that it is African who opposes a Vatican declaration that somehow moves traditional dogmatic roots, and the fact that it is African cardinal who puts on the table the crisis in which the synod has been introduced into the publication of fiducial supplicants says a lot about what the future could be. At the end of the period of St. Paul VI, the church was also in deep crisis. From my point of view, not as serious as the current one, and the cardinals gathered in the conclave called someone who came from the most faithful and most Catholic country in Europe, from Poland. I mean, they called St. John Paul II. Maybe in the future, the cardinals will decide to call someone who comes from Africa, where the vitality of the church still exists, even though they are paying dearly the price of being Catholics, because they are paying the price of blood. As always, let us pray.